All right. Welcome, everyone, to Nerd of the Rings. We have a very exciting live stream for you tonight. I am interviewing one of the lore masters from the game Lord of the Rings Online. Chris Pierson, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing great. How about yourself?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. Another day at the Middle Earth mines.
Yeah, you said you mentioned before we started broadcasting here, you're currently working on an expansion for the game. Do you want to go ahead and tell us that right off the bat? That's kind of
Sure,
some
yeah.
exciting stuff.
We've been working for a while now on the Yondershire expansion, which is as the name would suggest, an extra chunk of Shire that we did not launch with. That we left a bunch of it to add at a later date, so that we could go back to the well, as it were, with the Shire, and we got to do a goodly chunk of the north and west farthing for this update, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been I was one of the people who was working on the Shire back uh, a long time ago, before we launched, and it's been really interesting being able to go back and apply a lot of the know-how that we've acquired over the past 15 years to making a new part of the Shire.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And like I said, we were talking a little bit before we went live. So let's start back at the very beginning. So the very first question that I wanted to ask you, that I ask pretty much everybody who comes on the channel: how were you first introduced to Tolkien?
How was I first introduced to Tolkien? Well, it's a fairly standard answer, I'm sure. My parents, when I was a kid, I was probably 9. I was already a burgeoning nerd. I was into Star Wars. I had first edition D&D stuff. All of that. This was back in about 1980, and they gave me The Hobbit, and I read that in about 36 hours, and and then did not read Lord of the Rings until college. Which is
Mm,
that's the unusual version of the answer of the answer. I'm sure most people, will go rampaging
go
right to
straight. Yeah.
Lord of the Rings after that. But I became more of a fan of other parts of fantasy for a good while, when I was a teenager, and finally, when I was in, I think it was my fourth year of college, I went to the library and was like, okay, finally got to do this. I want to be a fantasy writer. I better go see the
The big
holy,
one. Yeah.
and plowed through it in the space of about a week.
Wow.
I think I got it during spring break, and by the time, whether it's a typically geeky way to spend spring break in college, and
Yeah.
by the time everyone came back, I devoured it, and and then didn't read it again for another 15 years. But I had definitely stayed up on all things Tolkien for a good while, and then we found out that we were in the running to do Lord of the Rings online, and because I'm a fantasy writer. I worked in shared worlds before. Everyone sort of looked at me and said, "Hey, you're good at regurgitating a lot of information. Why don't you read Lord of the Rings and everything else, and get back to us?" And so that was, I went to Tolkien boot camp for like 6 months. Reread Lord of the Rings a couple
Wow.
of times. I had read the Silmarillion already. I made it through Silmarillion the first time I tried,
Nice.
and but and then Unfinished Tales, the histories,
Hmm.
the letters,
Wow.
all the stuff that has come out in the years since Tolkien's passing,
Mhm.
and there's a lot, as I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone
Oh,
here is
yeah.
fully aware. Right now I'm looking at my desk. I've got my Hammond and Skull Reader's Companion sitting right
Right.
next to me. I've got the Fonstad Atlas. All sorts of other work that right down to stuff that I have been fed by Tolkien scholars that they have copied from stuff at Marquette
Right.
and various linguistic things and what have you. So my journey with Tolkien was it was very sudden at the start of this.
Mhm.
I and now I'm that guy. That my kids say to their teachers, "Oh, my dad speaks Elvish," and the teachers don't believe them, and I try to
Right.
downplay it because no one really speaks Elvish. But
Right.
I've had to do a lot of Sindarin over the past 15 years.
I
So
bet. So, I'm super fascinated by what you do with Lotro. So how did you get to um Standing Stone Games? Like what was your like professionally, what was your kind of career path there?
my career path it was a pretty quick one, or at least the start of it was pretty quick. I got out of college with a journalism degree, right at the time when they started shutting down all the newspapers,
Mm,
as print started to sort of yield to online, and online hadn't taken off yet. So I was an unemployed journalist in Toronto, and uh, and I got a call from a friend of mine who lived down here in Boston saying, hey, there's this company that's looking for fantasy people, and they know you're a writer, so I've been talking you up to them. Come down and interview. This was in 1996, and the company at the time was called Second Nature Interactive. And I came down here on a bus and got and did an interview, and got hired the next day, and then told them I couldn't start for 6 months because I had other commitments. But then they waited for me, and I came down here in October of '96 to work at Second Nature, and that's basically how I got my foot in the door. Is I was already in the room when the when Lord of the Rings Online became a reality.
mhm.
Second Nature became Turbine, which became part of Warner, and then we
Right.
split off again to become Standing Stone.
Right.
I was involved in the design and launch of Asheron's Call, which was one of the first massively multiplayer online, graphical
Mhm.
MMOs. And I was involved in the development of Dungeons and Dragons Online for a time, and then, but primarily I've been Lotro for the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
yeah.
I'm really curious, and we'll get to some viewer questions as well. People in the chat, I'll be uh bringing in questions, so keep the questions coming. If you have questions for Chris, one of the things I'm really excited to ask you about because of your unique position, you've been at Standing Stone before it was even excuse me, before it was even Standing Stone. So what was that like building Lotro from the beginning, from nothing?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that process, because I imagine that's pretty daunting to you know
Daunting is the word I was going to go for.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, it was difficult. When we first started talking about doing Lord of the Rings, my first reaction was, "Oh dear God, no!" Because that's so much.
Yeah.
It's so big. Um, uh, but fortunately, our lead designer at the time was fairly adamant that yes, this is an opportunity we're not going to put aside because you're scared. And it was launching the LOTRO was a real it was a process in deciding what parts of the world, for starters, that we wanted people to see, and
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to build at the get go without completely overloading things. So
Yeah.
that meant finding a chunk of the world that we were good. We felt would be good for telling a good story, good for as an on ramp for people who had maybe just seen Fellowship of the Ring,
Mm-hmm.
because optimistically at the time we thought, oh well, maybe we'll be out, we'll be able to come out at about the same time as by the time Return of the King is out. And no,
Yeah.
that didn't happen. Um, but the so it was, and it was, it had to be geographically cohesive, and we had to be
Mm-hmm.
willing to say, okay, yeah, we're not going to ship with Rohan, and we're not going to ship with Gondor or Mordor or anything, because they're far away from the Shire. And if
Right.
we launch without the Shire and Rivendell and all the stuff that people know from the first book and from The Hobbit,
Yeah.
from the beginning of The Hobbit, it's not going to feel like Lord of the Rings. It's going to feel like we're backing into the world in a weird way.
Right.
So we had to sort of pare things back and pare things back. That's one of the things that's really cool about Yondershire. Is one of the last things we cut for scope early on was a chunk of land between Ered Luin and the Shire,
Yeah.
just because you have to make sacrifices in order to launch on time,
Right.
and we felt like we had enough Shire to give people the feeling of the Shire. We wanted to give a good breadth of things, and now 15 years later, now that we have been everywhere else in pretty much in all four of the books,
Mm-hmm.
we have been able to come back and connect Ered Luin and the Shire again with Yondershire. It was, that was kind of a pet project of mine to do. Like, I wanted to have that done for the 15th year anniversary. As soon as we started talking about what we wanted to do for
Oh, very
15,
cool.
let's actually connect Ered Luin to everything else was pretty much top of the list.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
but yeah, I mean, trying to figure out what to do for the game. A lot of it was just, it was daunting, and you gotta pare it down to something that feels manageable,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually pare it down even more because oops, that wasn't manageable, and then hope that one day maybe we'll make it as far as Rohan, and then as far as Gondor, and oh, we'll never make it to the Gladden Fields. It would be cool if we did. Like a couple of years ago, we did the Gladden Fields.
Yeah.
So now it's really it's interesting, looking at the stuff that we've been developing lately and saying to ourselves, did you ever think we were going to get the good and the bad? That wasn't even vaguely on the radar for
Right.
until like after we dropped the ring in the volcano.
Yeah.
So it's been, yeah, I mean, it was very daunting at the start. It's super daunting looking back at it again from
Right.
15 years later and seeing all the work we've put in over the years. But it's really gratifying too to see the whole of Middle Earth coming together over time,
Yeah.
in a way that a lot of other adaptations just don't have the time and space to do, for either for narrative reasons or for budgetary reasons.
Right. Yeah. So that was another question that I was going to ask because, and it kind of jogged a memory just now when you said, when you mentioned shipped at the beginning, like I forgot that this would have been coming out when we actually had physical discs
Oh yeah.
for our computer game. And like, man, it's funny how easily we forget, what
Yeah,
times were like.
stay after the show. We'll explain to you youngins what CDs are.
I actually
Uh,
do remember those.
yeah.
I'm a bit older than I care to admit, but so one of the questions I had for you, there's been so many MMOs over the last 15 years that have come and gone. I was
Mhm.
reminded of some, I can't remember where, maybe in my Discord or something, somebody shared an image of a Pirates of the Caribbean one, and I thought, oh my gosh, that was so long ago. I can't believe that, I had totally forgotten about it. So what is it about Lotro, in your opinion, that has that staying power, that has kept it around and relevant and popular, and people have been playing it for so long, and new people keep discovering it for the first time? What is it about Lotro?
Well, I mean, obviously, the source material is a huge part of it. I
Hmm.
mean, there's only so many like cultural touchstone that sort of that it might be the only one that bridges like the literary and nerd worlds this
Yeah.
thoroughly. Um, and it's huge and beloved, and it has a now like almost 70-year, well, even longer if you count the Hobbit, but Lord of the
Right.
Rings has an almost 70-year history
Yeah.
that people have now you know have spent their entire lives reading it, and are now even older than I am. The so like that's number one. Like there's really not anything else. The only other real competition in the intellectual property spaces would be superhero stuff
Hmm.
and Star Wars,
Yeah.
and Star Wars is half as old as
Hmm.
as Lord of the Rings is.
Yeah.
Um, I think in addition to that, we put a lot of care and a lot of hard work, into keeping it true to the to Tolkien's, as true as a game can be,
Hmm.
to Tolkien's work and his and both the text, the body of the text, but also the spirit of the text. And I think that's been rewarded with a lot with very strong player loyalty.
Yeah.
The players, are great. We have one of the best player bases in games, and I'm not saying that just because they're ours. I'm
Yeah.
constantly floored at some of the dedication, uh, and the breadth of what the players are capable of putting together themselves within the world that we've built.
Hmm.
Um, and then it also helps that every decade or so, popular culture kind of comes wheeling back around and says, "Oh yeah, well, Middle Earth's back again." So
Yeah.
it gives us a new, sort of a new breadth of of content and people
Hmm.
being brought into the world to that people that they can now then go to the game and experience it from that end.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So I mean,
great.
it's been an extremely lucky thing to be, the people who have built Middle Earth in this way. It's I'm really, frankly, hard pressed to think of you know another work of literature that I've been able to I could have made a career out of
Right.
exploring to this front, with outside of just pure academia.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I to reiterate what you said, I've uh, had some friend. I have already confessed that I'm a kind of a newbie when it comes to Lotro, but I'm learning, and I can say that the community around this game is one of the most impressive aspects of it. The people are so kind, and like there's people who are way above my level that say, here, I'm going to help you, like I'm going to help you learn this game, it's going to be really super fun, and they make it even more fun than just, I mean, I would be content just wandering around Middle Earth listening to the wonderful music that you all have in each realm and just kind of going on my merry way, but they make it so much fun because it's such a great community.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare to have a community that's this mutually supportive,
Hmm.
and tolerant of each other, as ours is, and I certainly don't take them for granted. And and willing to tell us what, when they think that we've gotten something slightly inaccurate on the Tolkien front. The story I always tell, and I've been telling forever, was about I'll tell you about the squirrels. When we were first developing the game, we put out some sample screenshots, and one was like just of a squirrel in the woods that we'd thrown together a quick version of the old forest and popped the squirrel in there, and almost right away we found out it was the wrong kind of squirrel. Because it would be that is a North American gray squirrel, and Tolkien would not have approved it.
American
squirrels are different in England, and there's a lot of things like that I'm that actually taught me really early on to be really careful, not just about the source text, but about what inspired the source text as well. So, there's the people talk about all, in if corn shows up or tomatoes, or then it takes people out of the world a bit, because they're not lore appropriate, and being able to being able to sort of approach things not just from a purity to Tolkien standpoint, but in a like what would actually be in Middle Earth, flora, fauna, food,
right,
and what have you, language. There's a lot to it, and we try to get as much of it right as we can.
And now this kind of leads me into and we've got a viewer question here that will kind of lead me into a big topic I wanted to ask about is so Durin the Seventh, which is a great name, by the way, says, how do you come up with the names for all the thousands of NPCs and quest givers? And this kind of brings me into the larger point of, there's obviously so much depth in this world, but when you're creating something big like an open world game like LOTRO, you've still got to come up with stuff yourself that also fits and honors the lore. So what, and we can answer this question in with that, but so let's talk about, kind of what that looks like from your end.
Right. Well, that's the you're talking you're I am the person that administers the naming. And it's kind of an inside joke within the LOTRO team, that, like, don't tell Pierson, but we need another 30 Hobbit names, and then I'll quietly detonate when I find out that they need that. And
Right.
the we have a spreadsheet, that is our name request spreadsheet, and whenever whenever designers need names for things, whether it's characters or places, or right down to we need the names of 3 different kinds of herbs that the Easterlings might use, or something like that. That all goes into this spreadsheet, and then it gets every so often I take a day and and tell the children, hide, I'm naming things, and spend the day with 53 tabs open on my machine and various books piled around, trying to figure out, trying to work out, are there any names left in Sindarin that I can possibly make that are, or in Old English, Mercian Old English, for the Rohirrim, or Norse for the dwarves. We've done so much dwarf stuff recently that if I never have to name another Norse thing again, I'll be very, very happy. And, like, that's a weird sentence to say. But there are all like it gets so esoteric. Like where I've been for the Yondershire, I've been naming hobbits and
Hmm.
discovering the ways that the Tooks name themselves differently from other families. You know that they that Tolkien pulled much more from flamboyant medieval romance names rather than sort of more prosaic names or the Frankish names or the Welsh names that he tended to give to the stewards and the brandy bucks.
Yeah,
You know, it is the deepest of rabbit holes, and you know we it becomes a real challenge after a while to try to not repeat ourselves too,
I bet.
and you know particularly when you're naming stuff in Orcish and everything sounds like
Yes.
Blosmoors to begin with. That it's a you know, and the corpus of black speech is so small
Right.
compared with with what he had of Sindarin or even
Hmm.
Quenya. It you know it's a real pain in the neck. Um, when we um, when we did our most recent housing update for Erebor, um, I was told, oh, we need 150 neighborhood names for the different housing neighborhoods for Erebor. And okay, Kuzdul is not a friendly language
Right.
at all for translating stuff into
Yeah.
because it just looks like someone slapped the keyboard and got nothing but KHs and Z. And and to come up with that many between that and Norse, come up with that many names that were both intelligible, could be
Hmm.
potentially pronounced by a human, and were you could tell apart from each other. Was that was that hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Fortunately for that one, I had help from outside. I do have other people that I can, other scholars and people who've developed you know followings online that I can turn to for some stuff like that. But
Yeah.
even so, you know, I asked so a Kuzdal expert, and they exist.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
oh yeah.
We probably know the same
For
Kuzdul
potential
experts.
names. Sorry,
I said we probably know some of the same Kuzdul experts out
I'm sure we
there.
do. I'm sure we do. It's a small pool,
Yeah.
but we're there. But you know, I got a list of like 600 potential names from this person,
Hmm.
and was
Wow.
able to whittle it down just by dint of okay, well, let's only take one prefix. You
Hmm.
know, only use each prefix one time so that there's any chance that the people are going to be able to tell these apart. And that immediately dropped it down to like 43 or something like that. So it's naming stuff for Tolkien is hard,
Yeah.
and it's so much different than naming something for a world where you can just like make stuff up
Right.
and not have to have it grounded in either real world or made up but equally rigorous linguistics.
Yeah. So, what would you say? Here's another viewer question from Roak. What is the biggest challenge of being a Lord of the Rings online lore master?
Whew. Biggest challenge. There's so many. Um,
Yeah, obviously naming
yeah,
is something
naming, yes, but we've
is a
been
big
there.
one.
Um, I think I think frankly, just coordinating all the information when we decide we're going to do a section of the world, whether it's something as sort of whimsical as Yondershire or something as deeply rooted in the lore as Gundabad. Um,
Hmm.
Collating all of the information uh, that has been can often be spread about in like 35 different texts, and we only have the rights to use 4 of those texts,
Hmm.
but we don't want to contradict any of those other texts, but those texts all contradict each other, and sometimes they contradict themselves.
Yeah.
And then there's decades of conjecture from people, and then and there have been other approaches to doing it. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to discount the fact that, like, for instance, the Middle Earth role playing game back in the 80s, the paper game, did a ton of background work on the world.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, we made an early decision not to you know, to try not to replicate. Um, but the you know, but still, like, it's all that stuff is out there. There have been at least 3 different, you know, paper-based role-playing game attacks at the world. There, you
Mm-hmm.
know, there've been, you know, collectible card games. There've been all this.
Right.
Um, you know, looking at those and seeing, okay, well, what did people try with this part of the world that worked or didn't work, and then collating it all into a, a short. And if any of the other designers are watching this, they're now laughing at my use of the word short. Um, Document that encapsulates all of that lore, so the rest of the team doesn't have to go wading out into the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, that's almost certainly the most challenging part, and then making it all fit so that it goes on a map, you know,
Yeah.
and can be processed easily as gameplay. You know, it is a task to do all of that.
I bet. Yeah. Now, I couldn't help but think, as you're talking about, you have the rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and there's all this body of work outside of that. You mentioned all the other materials that you don't have the rights to, but you don't want to contradict it. I couldn't help but think, obviously, the elephant in the room, the Amazon series, is in a similar boat here, where they have certain rights, they don't have other rights. They have said that they don't want to contradict the things they don't have the rights to. So I can't help but think, like, you are one of the most uniquely situated people to understand what they are facing in terms of challenges with that show. um
Absolutely. I mean, you know, adaptation in general, but especially of something as this, as sprawling
mhm.
and legally complicated
Oh yeah.
as Tolkien's work is like, you know, I don't envy them, because they're skating much closer to the edge of, you know, at least in the timeline of what is acceptable
Hmm.
for them to do. I mean, I've seen a couple of shots from the from just from that first trailer. The stuff's taking place in, like, they're clearly doing flashbacks to the first age, and I'm like, how are you
Yeah.
doing this? How can you possibly? And it's, you know, I think it's just because the characters that they're using, their name is mentioned at some point in the books,
Mm,
and that's enough. As long as they're not, again, openly contradicting anything in the Silmarillion,
right.
you know, it's a real, you do, it's a real dance to figure out what you can do without like stepping squarely into only Silmarillion or only Unfinished Tales territory.
Hmm.
You know, we bumped into this, for instance, with when we did our own Second Age flashback
Mm,
recently, the tail end of the Second Age, when we did the Mordor Besieged, and we knew we had to have Isildur's sons involved in some way, because they were there and they were important to the story, in as much as they died with him at Gladden
right.
Fields and such. But we couldn't use their names.
Yeah.
We had to have these 3 guys, and we couldn't use any of their names. So we had to come up with a whole conceit for why would they be using alternate names,
Mm,
and you know, that they were, and you know, it was it you know, we've come up against it with things, you know, you come up against it with things like the Blue Wizards, like, you know,
yeah.
we know there are more wizards out there. We know a couple of them are blue. They managed to bump up against it cutely in the movies, but, you know, when Gandalf couldn't remember their
You
names.
couldn't
But,
remember
you
their
know,
names out.
there's all these things that, like, that if you know the texts and you know and you know you can look at some of the stuff we do and say, I see what you did there,
Yeah.
but we didn't step over the line, and
Right.
it can be really it's both challenging, but it also makes it kind of fun to be able to see how can we pull in stuff that we that people might not be able to expect that we can, just by just by dint of, like, fortunately Treebeard goes on at length about this thing at
Yeah.
this particular elvish kingdom, so we can mention it.
Yeah.
So it's the rights issues. The rights issues are super fun to deal with, and I know they're slightly different for the Amazon series, but they're
Hmm.
pretty close to what we're dealing with, I'd say.
Right.
They're just approaching it in a different time frame, and I don't envy them having to work within that time frame, because they've got much less other stuff to hang on to than we do, because
Right.
most of it hasn't happened yet for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, sorry, got a little echo there. Um, sorry, I'm gonna adjust this. So do you have some, of you mentioned things that you can kind of work in because Treebeard talks about it or something like that. Do you have some favorite examples of some of that stuff that you've been able to cleverly include that people might not have expected, or you were kind of pleasantly surprised, like, oh, we can actually do XYZ because of this reference in Lord of the Rings?
Whew. I mean, we've been able to do it a lot with the dwarves,
Mm,
in particular in the more recent stuff that we've been doing with Gundabad and the releases before that. Because that's a fortunate one, because he doesn't really get a lot into the dwarves in the other texts, but he
hmm.
still mentions a number of things about them. Um, Another example of something that we've been able to do is um, the other dwarf clans that aren't
Hmm.
that aren't
Longbeards.
the Longbeards. Again, never actually named
Mm,
in the body text.
right.
Not a one. So again, we had to come up with alternate names for them.
Ah.
Um, and that meant going to the linguistic well, in a lot of cases, and in particular, like the one that when we started pulled in our second big dwarf clan besides the Longbeards that we were going to include, we wanted to see, okay, what are the wicked dwarves of the East like? What's one that we can easily incorporate? And I hit on the ones that are known in the texts outside of what we have access to as the Iron Fists.
Hmm.
Um, and because that sounded like a good wicked dwarf clan
Right.
name, and we know nothing about them from the texts aside from
Right.
their name. And we so that then it became a challenge of, like, okay, well, how do we make them different enough that, one, we can give them their own name, which is what they call themselves, as
Right.
opposed to what the Longbeards call them. And that from that was born we decided, okay, let's not make them Norse, because Norse dwarves are what the Longbeards do.
Gotcha.
They do Viking cosplay. These guys, let's make them Slavic, because there's it's fairly thematically close. There's a lot of Slavic lore that's intertwined with dwarves in the real world. Um, and from that was born the Jelruka, who
Mm,
became, and because we couldn't use the name Iron Fist, it sort of developed this entire other culture just out of need of
yeah.
having to call them something else. And so they're Slavic based. What does that mean for them? What do we make them, we and they give that gives them a whole other character, and that from that grew their own storyline that has sort of come to its head with the Gundabad expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that would have happened if we could have. I don't think that would have happened to the extent that it has if we hadn't been able, or we had been able to call them just Iron Fists.
Mm.
Um, and it came right down to like coming up with their own writing system and such at one point, just because we had to keep asking questions about what makes these guys different from the
Right.
Longbeards. And if you look at a lot of renditions that people have done of the Seven Fathers of the Dwarves, particularly early on in Tolkien art, they look like seven Vikings, and
Right.
it's a lot more recent that people have started to look at the possibility that they might be influenced by other cultures,
Right.
which again we're seeing circle back around with the Amazon series and some of the other versions of dwarves that we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing starting to appear in that. So it's been, and we managed to include a bunch of other cultures for dwarves when we did the Azanulbazar
Mm-hmm.
expansion as well. We got to see what are the ones that would be known as the Stonefoots. What are they? Where did they come from? What sort of cultures would they pull from the south of Middle Earth instead of the east? And it's been it all of that sort of came from the fact that we didn't have the rights to the English
Right.
names that these seven clans had.
So it kind of it's kind of one of those what at first might feel like a huge hurdle ends up kind of being a blessing because it forces you to think through a lot of things that you might not have otherwise, and it's kind of opened up all these different avenues for storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's sort of one of the challenges of when we're building, and when particularly when we're coming up with a new region. Looking at the limits of what Tolkien wrote and what he implied was over the horizon, and being able and asking, okay, what can we do with this while still, not, we're never going to throw centaurs into Middle Earth, but like
Right.
where can we take things that feel like it might exist in that world, but over that horizon that he's always implying that there's stuff there.
Hmm.
And I mean that's we've done that from the get go, but when we from including places like Angmar in the initial launch of the game, uh, just being able to find the parts of the world that people have always wondered what that spot on the map means,
Right.
and actually be able to fill it in a bit.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from players that I think we just had someone comment how this game is their comfort game, and here it is. Danny says, if I'm ever feeling down, I just make a hobbit and run around the Shire delivering mail. And I've heard a lot of people that this is their comfort game, that they fire it up anytime, no matter the day, no matter what mood they're in, and they always feel like they're coming home to Middle Earth. And I've also heard people love exploring these areas that we don't go to it so much in the books. We get little footnotes, and so to be able to fill out that world is definitely I'm sure a challenge for you, but also a huge achievement that you guys have successfully done that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a challenge, but it's as work challenges go, it's one of the more fun ones to
Oh,
have,
absolutely.
because you know, again, I'm not trying to push Yondershire all the time, but it's a handy one to do because it's like the Shire map is this giant assemblage of dots with
Hmm.
names on them, and all those names mean something in English, not
Yeah.
or in some version of English, and each of those has implications for what is actually there. And but it's one thing to look at that and wonder, okay, what is in what is Longcleave?
Mm-hmm.
or what is gamut. And it's another thing to actually have to say, oh well, I need to say what is gamut, and come up with a whole, like, how are these hobbits different from the 18 other hobbit villages that people might already be familiar with, so we're not just seeing the same hairy-footed people in every single place. They all
Mm-hmm.
have their own. Each town has its own character. The towns I'm sorry, I lost the track
That's
there.
all right.
Each town has its own character. They all have their own particular history. Even the name Yondershire, like, we just needed a name for this section of the Shire because it wasn't really the North Farthing, it wasn't really the West Farthing, so we couldn't call it either of those things. But so it's like, oh, it's the Shire over yonder,
Yeah.
Yondershire. Great. Why is it called that? And that became like a point of principle for the folk of the Yondershire, that they considered themselves different from the people who live in the Hither Shire,
Yeah.
down to the south. Again, every weird little decision that you have to make, it really helps to ask, well, okay, let's actually, how can we ground this choice in the game lore,
Mm-hmm.
so that it feels like it's a part of something that Tolkien, and I don't want to say Tolkien would have planned it, but he might have
Right.
wanted there to be this sort of thing.
Yeah.
When he said that the Northtooks are the descendants of Bulror, like, and they live in Longcleave. Well, great. So why are the Northtooks? Why did they not go back to Tuckborough
Mm-hmm.
after, and coming up with the storyline for that, and
Yeah.
that feeding into the story of the story of Longcleave. All of that goes into the planning of the lore for the game. And I can go. Trust me, I can go on at length. I have so many personality documents about the different parts of the world that I've written, that sort of expand out the history and the cultures and such. And
Yeah.
there's only so much we can actually include in the game, but I try to, it's, you want to give more information um than the designers need, so they've always got
Right.
something to pull from.
Absolutely. So this kind of leads into my next question, from Zalin. How do you expand the story yet stay true to the lore, which Lord of the Rings Online does so well? So yeah, that's, I mean, thinking of how, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording and broadcasting here, how Tolkien fans are kind of a different animal than a lot of fandoms, where Star Wars, George Lucas makes up some names and everybody's just like, okay, cool, that's that thing's name. But like Tolkien fans are pretty well versed, I'd say, on average, in Tolkien's works, and they have a bit more fervor for the world, maybe, and the particulars of it. So how do you strike that balance of, okay, I've got to make some stuff up, but I don't want it, I want it to fit in with Tolkien. So what's that process like, and what is that challenge like?
Well, I mean, there's no one answer to that,
Yeah.
but the each region has its own challenges that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of cases, there are, Tolkien. One of the good things about Tolkien is why while he developed this incredibly rich world, he left so much interesting stuff in the margins
Yeah.
and implied, that you can extrapolate,
Mm-hmm.
just from the way he names things, from the way that from a throwaway line some character says at some point. You can always find some extra piece of meat, uh, and the things that he doesn't explain too. That
Mm-hmm.
that leads to questions, that then like every unanswered question from the books is a potential storyline that we can
Yeah.
that we can develop. Um, for instance, it's a while ago that we did Gondor, but one of the questions that came that I had been wondering about for a long time is like, why did Boromir never get married? Why
Yeah.
was he? Like Denethor is really big on the line of the stewards. Like, why didn't he tell
Didn't do
these two
anything
sons
to
of his
extend
to
it.
just
Yeah.
start making heirs, guys, please? Um, and and from that came an entire storyline. Uh, I asked. I have various Tolkien scholars that I can email and ask questions like that, and a lot of the
Hmm.
time I get responses like, "Well, I don't know why Boromir never got married." But the we being able to ask that question then allows us to think of like, okay, well, this gives, for instance, for the Boromir question, maybe he was betrothed, and we just never find
Mm.
out about it in the books because why would we? It's perfectly logical that he would have that he would have been that he would have potentially had a marriage waiting for him once he was finished all of his daring do that he was always rushing about doing. But maybe he wasn't into it. Maybe she
Yeah.
wasn't into it. And we came up with this whole storyline where he had in fact been betrothed, arranged marriage kind of thing with Lothiriel, the daughter of Imrahil,
Mm.
um, and that there was this all grew out of a prophetic vision that Denethor had that saw Lothiriel as becoming the queen of a great kingdom. And Denethor thought that, well, clearly that means that if I marry my son off to her, then he'll eventually be able to become king of Gondor in some way.
Ah.
And it turns out that no, he was seeing her being married to Eomer, and it's Denethor, so he 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 misinterpreted it to his peril. Um,
Interesting.
and so that gave us a whole storyline for Lothiriel when we got to Dol Amroth that
Yeah.
wouldn't have been there otherwise. So always asking weird questions like this about the text and about things that Tolkien doesn't specifically address really helps to give ways to fill things in that then feels like it's organic because it's not just adding to it. It has a place in the lore
Hmm.
that similar, like we did a lot of this in Gundabad, and well, we've done it everywhere,
Yeah.
with and we've done other things like asking questions about like, well, um, who else was participating in the battle of the last alliance
Hmm.
besides, we know Gil-galad and the various other elf kings like Orifer, who again
Hmm.
we can't name, and Isildur and Elendil and Anarion.
Yeah.
But who did the dwarves were involved, they just weren't deeply involved in the same
Right.
way that the elves and men were there things like, were there other groups that came into it? Were the Northmen,
Mm.
the progenitors of the people of Rovanion, were they
Yeah.
involved somehow? And and what were their leaders like? And why don't we hear about that in
Hmm.
is it just because it's 3,000 years later and stuff falls out of history, or are there reasons why certain groups might no longer be considered part of the last alliance in the official telling?
Hmm.
It being able to sort of carefully challenge the preconceptions of the lore is another way that we can build that we try to we try to do occasional things that are completely unexpected, so that it's not just sort of coloring everything in. It's giving
Yeah.
it we're trying to put a spin on it that I hope in a lot of cases Tolkien would say, oh, that makes sense,
Yeah.
that the Great Plague actually was might have been a part of Sauron's ultimate design, but didn't quite
Hmm.
work out. You know that
Yeah.
that all, that is all that's all a part of trying to make it keep it a cohesive world, as opposed to just a bunch of little chunks that we rattle off, and one after another.
Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned earlier, if you never have to come up with a dwarven name again, that'll be fine by you. So and I appreciate you talking so much about dwarves because I love dwarves. So the next question from Velthric: what people or race or being do you wish there was more material on?
Whew. Um, well, yeah, I really wish, if we're talking about peoples, I wish there was more, that we knew more about the Easterlings and the Haradrim.
Yeah.
Far and away number one. They're the most tantalizing parts of the map, to me, in a lot of ways, because they
Yeah.
really are the blank spaces. They're literally like, particularly for Harad, it's a couple of words in a literal blank on the map.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we know from the care that Tolkien put into Rohan and into Gondor and into Arnor and the various parts of the free peoples, of the northwest of Middle Earth, that he probably had a lot of really great ideas for these things, but
Yeah.
you just never saw the light of day.
Right.
We see glimpses of it when he mentions things like the Wain Riders and the Baltron in the east, or the tantalizing name Variags of Khand.
Yeah.
Who? Like you mentioned, like they're, oh yeah, the Variags. They were
Yeah.
there too in the battle. It's like,
Yeah.
for the longest time when I was a kid, I was like, there's some other kind of orc or something, some monster, and it wasn't until later that I realized, no, those are men.
Yeah.
And then it was later on that I realized that Variag is an actual, like, word for the Varangian Guard in Byzantium,
Hmm.
who were Vikings, who settled in Constantinople.
Yeah.
And so like that allowed us to, okay, well, the Variags are actually Vikings. What's the equivalent of that? My God, they're Northmen. Why are
Right.
Northmen in Khand, and
Right.
why are they the ones coming to fighting instead of the people of Khand? And then you have a whole other storyline there. Um, and it you know the but we know so little about Harad and Rune, including, like, those are not the names that they call them at home, because those just
Right.
means south and
East and
east,
south. Yeah.
and they don't speak there.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting trying to imagine what is there, but I do wish that there was more from him
Yeah.
to explain, like, is Harad one great empire? Is it a bunch of city states? Is it,
Right.
it's, everyone has their vision of it,
Mhm.
who's thought about it to any extent, and we all, and we're all probably all going to see one version of Harad, at least, when the Amazon series comes out. Harad
Yeah.
3,000 plus years ago, but still,
Right.
it's going to be interesting to see how that jibes with how people who've only really experienced them as a bunch of guys with giant elephants,
Right.
who trample a bunch of Rohirrim. That's all we really know about them at this point,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and Corsairs.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I've said a lot here on my channel and in conversations with people is one of the things that I'm most looking forward to and really hope that they do and do well is adapt Rune and Harad and tell us some stories there. Because I'm always surprised when, when people uh, think they have a good grasp on the lore of Tolkien and have a very one-dimensional idea, and then to know that there's these two other very big cultures and very big lands at play. I like I just get so excited about the possibilities to play in those sandboxes.
Right.
So I hope that they do that, and take some influence from some sources, like you said. You look at other you looked at Slavic when you were looking at different things for dwarves. Like, let's take some other influences and give them a Tolkien, through a Tolkien lens. How would Tolkien approach these? Like, that's the kind of
Absolutely.
stuff I would love to see.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they approach that in their series, and and how other whatever other like, I can't imagine that we're not going to see some amount of that in other games, like with things. I don't
Right.
know if the Gollum game is the one that will break the lid off of that, but he's
Right.
definitely, like, if it takes place in a part of the world where you have the much greater potential of running into Haradrim than you do in the books.
For sure. Absolutely. Now, I've seen a lot of people commenting that I should ask you about the Earthkin and about coming up with them. So what can you
Mm.
tell us about the Earthkin, especially for those like myself who's just getting into the game? What kind of give us the beginners level, but then also for the people who are the diehards who know about the Earthkin. Tell us about the development of them.
I'm honestly trying to remember exactly where the Earth King came from. I know there was an element of wanting to weave in a bit more, like, something that felt more like it came out of the Kalevala of the of Finnish, uh, but that was only really the beginning of the development of the Earthkin. I mean, the glib answer is someone drew a really weird looking troll, and we were like, well, that doesn't fit with the other trolls, but let's find a way to use it. One of our concept artists came up with a whole bunch of really interesting monster ideas, and the Earthkin, we thought, okay, well, we know that there's all sorts of strange things
Hmm.
that Aragorn sort of refers to as like you have no idea what's up here,
Hmm.
and we didn't want them all to just be flat out stuff that wants to murder everyone. And so we thought in terms of, like, well, what if there was a race of like giant-ish, troll-ish, not, sort of ent-ish, that, sort of the earth the earth equivalent of an ent, instead
Hmm.
of trees, they're rock and earth and so forth. The whole natural world made flesh that he does so often in the books.
Yeah.
And so the Earthkin, were born out of that, and allowed us to have a version of the, like when you first hit the Ents, when you're reading Two Towers or seeing the movies. It's like, what is this? Like, I thought I knew everything about this world, but there's talking walking trees. Like, what?
Right.
Where did that come from? And that even surprised him when he was writing it. And we wanted to have an element of that, even when we launched the game. And so the
Hmm.
Earthkin sort of filled that role of, this is something you did not fully expect.
Yeah.
Um, and they are, they look more foul but feel more fair, kind of thing,
Mm.
that he touches on, a lot in his writing as well. And it was an interesting exercise in writing content for something that was just, not a part of the legendarium already in any way, shape, or form, really, but could potentially have been, living up in the North Downs. We just didn't hear about it in the books, because why would we? Why would,
Yeah.
no one? There was no reason for it to come up. And
Right.
being able to show stuff like that, a lot of the similarly, a lot of the stuff that we see down in Dunland are monsters and creatures that we don't normally come across in the stories, and a lot of it gets pulled in from Celtic folklore,
Right.
because that's what the inspiration for the hill folk and the
Right.
Dunlendings is. We try to keep it so that it feels like it fits with the overall Tolkien vibe, and it's not just like cramming the monster manual into this box here.
Right.
But we want to put things in the game that people are going to look at it and say, wait, what's that? Again, like the Watcher in the water,
Mm-hmm.
like what's
Right.
that thing? Like that implies there's a whole other thing going on somewhere in the depths of the earth that we never otherwise see.
Right.
So it fortunately he threw enough weird in amongst the everyday in the stories that it gives a little bit of room to play, and the
Yeah.
Earthkin were an outgrowth of
Yeah.
the spirit of that.
Very cool. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I've always kind of felt uh, kind of makes Middle Earth feel a bit more real. The fact that there's, things that are kind of mysteries, and like you said, like the Watcher in the water shows up, and then that's all we hear from it. It's just like, oh, there was that thing. No, I'm not going to tell you any more about it. So, uh, from your standpoint, I'm sure that's frustrating at times. That's tantalizing at times, and sometimes that's a great uh, springboard for ideas. Um, what was your kind of stance on that stuff before you got into Lotro to being the lore master Lotro, where you had to try to answer some of these questions and come up with things? Was that also something that you enjoyed about the world, or are you kind of the mind where you want everything explained and so you were, a
I,
little
I always
frustrated?
I always liked knowing there was more out there,
Mm,
that there was that you could climb to the top of the tower and see the sea, but without actually going to the sea. It's actually really weird, in a lot of ways, having to fill in the stuff that people have sort of grown up knowing that there's another story there, but we'll never know what the real what happened
mm-hmm.
at it, and it's it's been a it's I mean, I tell myself, the thing I'm always saying is, like, if I told 8-year-old me or 9-year-old me first reading The Hobbit
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, so go forward a few decades, this is what you're going to be doing, and you're actually going to be living in this world.
Right.
uh the number one, I would have been like, who are you and why are you in my room? But the um it it's just such a strange job to have, really, when I think about it. But I had also, I've mentioned before that I'm a oops, sorry, I partly disappeared there. I I was a fantasy writer before I came to Middle Earth. I have worked
Mm-hmm.
in other shared worlds, so I'm already kind of accustomed to 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 coloring outside the lines that other
Yeah.
people have drawn. And that was one of the appeals of something. You mean I get to do that, but with this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is going to that's terrifying. But it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Um, and I think pretty much everyone on the team would agree that that's a lot of the appeal of it. Like, we're the all of us either started out as or have grown to be Tolkien fans, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge, I mean, it's a giant responsibility, but it's a lot of fun to be able to do it, to do it in a way that respects the work,
Yeah.
and isn't just making another sword and sorcery game.
Right. Yeah, and I think, from speaking to fans of the game, that's one of the big things that they say why they love the game so much is because, um, I think you hear it a lot with the Peter Jackson films as well. People could tell that there was a lot of love for and respect for Tolkien and his world that he created. And it seems like that's also the case with you guys. I hear a lot of the same stuff that I hear about the films, why people love it so much. And it's because there's a love of the people creating this for Tolkien and his work.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I would never have lasted if I didn't love the work.
Right.
I would, I'd be insane somewhere muttering imprecations in Norse, which I only do in my spare time now. Um, but it's amazing to be able to work alongside someone of Tolkien's, like, just his influence on all of on fantasy and on literature and on just the our culture. There's, again, I keep coming back to this, like, is there anything like it? Not really. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
maybe, there was a chance for a while that maybe Harry Potter would get there in 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And even then, there isn't the same level of rigor, like insane rigor,
Yeah.
that he brought to this. That was because it was a lifelong passion project of his.
Right.
It was the thing he had to do,
Yeah.
um, because he had to get he had to get this language out on the paper. And I get to work inside of that. And,
Yeah.
like, what more could I ask for?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's definitely a credit to you guys for the hard work that you guys put in, that um that care comes across. And you obviously don't, I won't mention any other games by name, but we know there's some games out there that are very, very we'll say cavalier with the lore, and that is definitely not you guys. And I think there's definitely a an appreciation among Tolkien fans, especially the ones that are the most passionate about it. Now, I wanted to ask, of all the things that you've worked on in Lotro, what is your favorite thing that you've seen adapted over the last 15 years?
Who Favorite thing out of all of that?
Now, I know you have
Which
Yondershire is obviously the most recent, so there's
which
there.
child do you love the most? Um, hmm. I would say, I mean, interestingly, I feel like, and partly because it's one of the parts of the books that speaks to me the most. But when I got when we got to Rohan, and
Hmm.
we were able to flesh out that particular nation, and, you know figure out who all the names were of the people who died in the battle, that amazing, that he wrote that amazing verse about.
Hmm.
Figure out how, what all their roles were in the kingdom as it was deteriorating. Um, like, and I think it was the first time that we really were able to full on go whole hog in depth on something.
Hmm.
A lot of the spaces that we were in up till that point are really places without a lot of immediate history.
Mm.
They're either they're either empty, or they're really recent, like in the case of the Shire, or they're
Yeah.
timeless and unchanging, like Lorien and Rivendell. Uh, Whereas Rohan is just like, it's. I mean, I guess it's technically more recent than the Shire, but it has
There's a
more
lot
history.
there.
There's a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
there. Um, the And being able to sort of say, okay, who were all these kings? What stories would the Rohirrim tell about some of these kings?
Hmm.
What do we what do we know about the different, the different sections of the kingdom, besides these four locations that we basically are confined to in the books?
Hmm.
um and asking, what are the roles of women? Is that were shield maidens more of a thing than just Eowyn? Were they
Hmm.
historically a thing that's fallen out of practice? Were there other women like Eowyn
Yeah.
who might have been an inspiration to her?
Hmm.
Um, uh, who what was Theodred like? That was our first exposure to Rohan, was actually before we got to Rohan, getting to meet Theodred in Dunland.
Yeah.
Um, it was a lot of fun. It was the first time we really got to go in, like really get deep into the lore, and in a way that being in ruined parts of the world and places that are preserved by the three rings and such didn't really afford us that possibility. So I'll always have a soft spot for Rohan.
Yeah.
It was also the first time I got to really flex some serious linguistic geek
Mm.
muscle, because we got to pull in a lot of Old English
Yeah.
stuff, and do things like, oh well, there's all these runes on the floor of Meduseld. He mentions the branching runes. We actually have to say what these runes say. They can't
Yeah.
just they can't just be gibberish. So
Right.
then we wound up. Okay, well, maybe there's a verse that they would have transcribed. What's it? Oh well, where is the horse and the rider? But that's a fantastic verse. That's fundamental to the character of the Rohirrim. But it
Right.
would be in Old English. Do I know anyone who speaks Old English? As it happens, I do, because there's Michael Drought, who's a
Yes.
professor
Yeah. Yeah.
of Tolkien studies and of Old English. Lives actually just about a 10-minute drive from me, weirdly.
Oh, nice.
Um, and I've given lectures in his class. He's come and visited with us. We talked online for the game. And I said, well, can you translate the horse and the rider poem into Old English for me? And then we can put that on the floor. And then he was like, yes, hang on, I'll get it. And then, and he's working out. He's not just translating it. He's working out. He's making sure that it's got the right alliteration, and that it's that the verses still has the right rhythm to it,
Right.
not just for Rohan, but for Old English poetry. And that was, just being able to do stuff like that, and like, you know yeah, I'll just call up my Anglo-Saxon
Right.
expert friend, who and have him write something that will go on the floor
Yeah.
in front of Theoden's throne. Again, this is a job.
Right.
um, but yeah, I mean yeah, Rohan was a blast to do. And it's all like, I don't if you ask me again, like in a couple of days, I might say, like, building Minas Tirith here behind me
Yeah.
was a highlight. Even though it had a lot of challenges, being able to figure out what all of those buildings actually were, and it's only a model.
Hmm.
The all of that has been just super fun.
Yeah. So and I mean, I don't know who could possibly read the books or watch the movies and not have a soft spot for Rohan. So that's an incredibly applicable answer. Um, so as you were talking, what stories the Rohirrim would tell and things like that. It just jogged to memory, as we saw some concept art for the first time for the War of the Rohirrim anime that's coming out. So it's not just the Amazon adaptation, but we've got a anime movie coming out as well, and it's part of what makes Middle Earth so fun for me personally. I think is um, I got to thinking about it and seeing the concept art of one of the Mumiks attacking the Rohirrim, and you
Yeah,
mentioning
that came as a
what's
shock, didn't it?
yeah,
Seeing the
yeah,
moon after that, yeah.
yeah. And I was thinking, as this might be connecting to the Peter Jackson films, I'm like, oh well, if this takes place, Theoden's going to be raised being told this story of when Rohan faced a Mumik, and so then at Pelennor Fields, when he turns around and there's a huge line of
All of them.
Mumiks,
Yeah.
yeah, like oh my gosh, that hits a little harder. It's
Hmm.
kind of the fun of being in the Middle Earth sandbox.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
and I mean just him charging into battle and defeating the king of
right.
the Haradrim, like
Yeah.
that has a lot more.
The
If they
serpent. Yeah.
had if the Haradrim actually played a role in the ultimately the death of Helm,
Yeah.
of his not his direct ancestor but his his
Predecessor. Yeah. Yeah.
predecessor, then yeah, it's a huge. It really deepens everything. That
Yeah.
said, I was like, my initial reaction was like, "There's a what? And it's where?" When I saw
Yeah.
the Mumak, but then again, you look at the lore, and yeah, it makes sense that they might have been able to, because there were, we know
Yeah.
the Haradrim were involved in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably all being coordinated by greater powers than we saw behind than we actually know from the text. I mean,
Yeah.
Sauron had his fingers all over the place by
Oh
that.
yeah.
So just the fact that there would be these guys would bring this thing up. I mean, yeah, it's a it's a siege engine on legs. Of course, he'd want to
Right.
have.
Yeah. Why not? It's like, hey, we're going up against these guys who have a great cavalry. It's like, what can we do against that? Oh, we happen to have these giant elephants that come in
Yeah,
really handy.
it also gives them something to defeat in the
Mm-hmm.
in the film, besides a bunch besides a bunch of screaming Welshmen.
Yeah.
That which is that's what I'm wondering about is, it's gonna be a lot of humans fighting each other,
Right.
um, and that's I are they going to work orcs into it at all? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
From
It,
my experience, yeah, you can find a way to work orcs into it, sure, but
right.
it's probably not what it should be ultimately. So I can't believe that movie's being made in the
Yeah.
best possible way. I can't believe that movie's being made, and I'm hoping it can be the first of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that they'll be able to tell other stories from the history that way,
Yeah.
that might not necessarily work with another series, and they'll be able to
Yeah.
cover more ground that way.
Yeah.
Because I'm all about the history flashbacks, and
Yeah.
I feel like the like once it became clear that the Amazon series was doing the second age,
Mm-hmm.
I started looking at the third, at everything that came before in the third age. And I'm like, how are we going to get to see all of that? Like
Right.
that's all on the table, like rights
Yeah.
wise. Like there's
Right.
almost none of it is in aside from a few things that come up in Unfinished Tales.
Yeah.
Like that's all fair game.
Right.
So I really hope we get to see, that at some point we get to see the anime version of the Battle of Fornost.
Mm. So that's why I was just thinking. I was like, one of my
And
first thoughts
the Witch
was,
King on the
yeah,
battlefield, for
yeah.
real, not getting owned by Eowyn, but actually like
Mm-hmm.
laying waste to the Dunedain. Yeah, please, yes,
Yeah.
please, I'll take that.
That was the first thought that I had when you said, I hope this is the first of a thing. Like
Yeah.
I am right there with you 100%. And my second thought was Angmar War. Like, let's see
Hmm.
the Witch King's kingdom.
Oh,
And it's
absolutely.
something that's, I think part of the genius of War of the Rohirrim is, it takes something very familiar, even to casual fans of the films, and gives you more of that. So we get more Rohirrim, whereas this is, hey, you remember this guy who is really menacing and a big deal as a bad guy? Let's see what he was up to.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm right there with you. I hope this is the first of a thing that we see, the kind of these, whether they're one-off films or whatever. I'm all on board for it.
Absolutely.
So next question I had for you. This is from another follower from Dima. What does the relationship between lore masters and game designers look like from a lore perspective? So you mentioned you have a spreadsheet for names, so we know
Yeah.
that much. So what how does that relationship between game designers, how often, I'm curious how often you have to shoot down game designers idea and say, hey, you can't do that.
Um, it comes up.
Yeah.
It came up much more often at the when we were early in development
Mm.
and everyone was finding their feet. We have enough senior people now and people who have been, who were Tolkien fans ahead of time, or who have been developing in the world for long enough
Mm-hmm.
that we all sort of have a mutual trust at this point, and the newer people are very very quick to pick up. Like we've been very lucky with the more recent designers that we brought aboard, that they're they're all very capable writers and capable
Mm.
of working in other people's work, but putting their own spin on it.
Mm-hmm.
The Ultimately, like, I'm and if you want to go nerd out and put it in terms of D&D, um I'm the guy who writes the source book, and they're
Mm.
the dungeon masters.
Okay.
So, I essentially, when we're making a new part of the world, and I go and like disappear into my hole, and with all my books and my websites and weird documents and so forth, um, and I come out the other end of it with what we call a region personality spec, which is basically just here's everything you need to
Mm.
know about this area. Here's who's in charge. Here's the history. Here's
Yeah.
local customs. Here's I'll probably throw in a couple of local sayings that people use. Here's
Mm-hmm.
what they eat. All of that. Um, and here are some basic story. Here's a sketch of what the story could be.
Mm.
Here's some adversaries. Go to town.
Yeah.
And the content our content designers who design the storyline and the quests. Number one, our chief, um, um, the person in charge of the epic story, Jeffrey Libby, is every bit the Tolkien nerd that I am. So
Mm.
he takes the basics of that, and he's already got like 47 ideas before I even hit them with the region personality spec. And he's also very capable of taking the wilder ideas of the and various other senior people at the company are we're all very capable of taking the wilder ideas and not just squatting them down, but trying to figure out how to make them work in a lot of cases too. Because usually there's a good idea, even if someone comes up with something totally inappropriate for the thing, there's a good idea in there somewhere.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's it's our job as senior people, as the the lore the lore council, to not just say what is and what isn't, but like
Mm.
how it can be made a part of the adaptation.
Right.
And so that
Yeah.
the content designers aren't just feeling like they're getting everything, like they're being put on rails, that they have a little bit of creative freedom to tell their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they all of our content designers have their own particular styles, their own particular kinds of content they like to make, and it so happens that it tends to mesh very well. Like, some of them will like to do more whimsical stuff, some like to do the darker, more momentous things.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them like to just come up with fun new monsters, and that have, and then we have to figure out, like, well, how does this even fit with the well, fortunately there's plenty of terrible things gnawing the bones of the earth, in that Tolkien implies that there's, again, a lot of room to play.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the we're I think we're super cooperative, as a team, not just on a, like, I'm not handing down wisdom or anything to people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more just giving them the facts,
Yeah.
and giving them a nudge if they stray too far from Tolkien's visions of things like of 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 the finality of death and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That was a big thing early on, was treating death and the dead properly, because it's very different from a lot of
Mm.
fantasy, but people don't
Yeah.
realize that until they read really deeply into it.
Wow.
It's just a matter of being able to also give people nudges when they use words that just are not Tolkien words. Um,
Gotcha.
you know, that's too French. That's too. No one gets mesmerized in Tolkien, because mesmer doesn't he wasn't a guy in Tolkien. There has to be another word for it.
Ah.
There's a whole linguistic style that we have people at the company who take the time to edit the text to try to get it as close to Tolkien, at least something that Tolkien would have written, and iron out the weird linguistic um, um, trappings that often come that people will tend to put on things
Right.
who aren't used to writing like Tolkien.
Yeah.
Because boy, does he
Wow.
have a specific style,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
like 7 specific styles, depending on which group you're writing about.
Right. And I imagine, that's a huge part of why the game feels so much like Middle Earth. The language is a big part. Obviously, Tolkien the linguist is very, very intentional about, the words he uses and, the
Mm-hmm.
languages he creates and everything. I'm sure that um, that's music to any Tolkien's fans' ears, how important that is to you guys as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely, and like, yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, I end up going down these weird etymological rabbit holes when I'm trying to look up like synonyms for things that sound more Tolkienian, and finding out
Yeah.
what words are just oh, that's not even vaguely Old English, but it certainly
Mm.
looks like it. And and then finding out things that you would not expect to be Old English are. I just found out the name Chad is Old English.
Really?
Yes, there's a Saint
Wow.
Chad of Mercia.
Huh.
He
I
brought
would
he
have
brought.
never guessed that.
Neither did I. Neither did I. So now I'd have to resist the urge to throw a rider of Rohan named Chad
Chad.
in.
Man. Yeah, that's one of those that, wow, that would be something to come across.
It would be. It
I
would be. But and it's that's but that that actually is an example of something that, like, yeah, you could have someone named Chad in the game, and it would be totally
technically, yeah.
linguistically appropriate, and yet we're not
You're
actually
right.
going to do that, because
Yeah.
no one people are going to be like, well, wait a second. Um, and the English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm curious, as I've mentioned a couple times, I'm kind of learning my way around Lotro, and I'm absolutely loving it, loving the community. What advice would you have for people who have never played the game before, but they've, either recently come to Tolkien, or have recently come across Lotro, or just learning about it for the first time and find out, or even if they've known about it but have never dove into it because they feel daunted, that, oh, this game's 15 years old, I'm coming in so late. I hear that a lot, like, I have never played it before, so, won't I be lost? What would be your advice for people who are, kind of interested in testing the waters?
Well, I mean, I would say this is a really interesting opportunity to get into a game that is like, yeah, you can look at it and be daunted by it, or you can look at it and be like, oh my god, I like the I can literally walk into Mordor from the Shire, um, in a way that even the people who've been with us for 15 years, they had to wait for this stuff.
Yeah.
But like, if you want to jump into to Middle Earth and go almost anywhere at this point that the characters in the first four books went, and talk to any of the characters that they met, and experience the stories that they heard. Like, if you are, if Tolkien is your thing,
Hmm.
this is an opportunity that I would have gladly, like, I would have been all over this back once I got into Lord of the Rings. Like I said, I wasn't an entire Tolkien freak at the get go when we first started
Right.
developing, but I became one fast. Like, you, it is not very. It's not a lot of cases. There's not a lot of cases where you can experience like an entire, like, 600,000 word work of literature on the ground level.
Right.
And again,
Yeah.
I'm making it sound really intimidating, but it's not,
Yeah. No.
because you can also go to the Shire and deliver the mail if you want to. You can go to uh, you can compose your own music and form a band with people and go play at Weathertop every year at Weatherstock. And you
Hmm.
don't, there's all, and it's free to start out. So what have you got to
Yeah.
lose? It's a it's kind of a ridiculous opportunity to get into this kind of story on a personal level, um, and do a lot of what you want to do,
Hmm.
that you would want to do within that world. Um, it's I think that there's room for casual play, as well
Absolutely.
as hardcore. Gotta max my level out kind
Right.
of play.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and like you mentioned, it's free to start out. There's a lot of free, like, that you get a lot for not paying anything. Like you said, there's all these areas you can explore. I've seen people comment on here. I think someone said took them roughly 5 hours to walk from the Shire to Mordor. So you can definitely do that if you so choose.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and soon we'll be able to walk from Ered to Mordor. Just
Yeah,
let me get
even
Yondershire into the game, and we'll be
that's
set.
right. um, so obviously, 15, we're celebrating 15 years of Lotro this year. So is there anything, you mentioned Yondershire. Is there any other, things on the horizon that, fans can be looking for? Any teases that you can give us?
There are, and I don't think I can say anything
Okay.
about anything beyond Yondershire, but we're always. I have, again, surprise. I have all kinds of documents and maps and so forth, saying we could go here, or we could go here, or we could do this, and it's more a question of, like, trying to prioritize what we do
Yeah.
first. But there are plans. They are in the works. We're already working on the thing that comes after Yondershire.
Mm.
Like, that's why I'm finishing up Yondershire. Uh, not completely on my own. There's I've got uh, another world builder who's helping me with the towns that I couldn't quite get my attention to.
Yeah.
Um, but we have other world builders who are already developing the next section of the world, and I can't really say anything about that, except I'm sure you'll be happy to see what it is, and I'm
Cool.
going to leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand. Um, yeah, so I'm curious, I imagine, after talking with you that you would be the type of person that has a laundry list of areas that you could go next. So what over the years, as you guys consider, obviously for a while there, you were kind of tracking um, the logical next one. You started with the Shire, obviously, and then you worked your way eventually getting to Minas Tirith and everything. How does that decision making process come about? How do you guys land on, okay, what should we do next?
Well, I have these darts. No, it's again, we basically like I have at present 4 different story tracks
Hmm.
that I put together pitches for, that we have that can go to different places and other things within the world. Um, and those are only the four my four personal top choices. There are other things we could potentially do. Depends on how for instance, we might change our priorities depending on like what other properties end up and how what they end up how they end up succeeding or hopefully just succeeding.
Yeah.
Um, but I have four completely different directions that we can go, and we've already changed our minds once, and I think we are now on track for what the one that we're going to be doing for the next little while. But the next one is probably going to be one of those other three, and they're all ready to go.
Mm.
The process of making the decision is really it's it's pretty loose. Like we just we a bunch of us sit down and we look at them all and we say, okay, well, let's do this thing next. And
Yeah.
we and there's a little more to it than that. Like if an area is going to require a ton of art,
Mm.
for instance, that might cause it to be knocked down a rung or two because
Right.
we have finite art resources, and we have another game that we also that's competing for those art resources.
Right.
So there are factors beyond just I want to go and go I want to go back to the first age and see Balerion. That we're not going to Balerion. Don't come for us. um the uh there's so it's a very fluid process, but
Hmm.
you know we we know what we're doing for the next little while, and we
Hmm.
have a decent idea of what we're doing after that, and
Yeah.
then we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really I have to be wildly vague about
Yeah.
about
No, I
about about
absolutely.
what we're doing next, but there's there's still so much to see in
Yeah.
Middle Earth. I'm in a lot of ways, as sad as I was to get to Mount Doom, a lot of the, it's in a way a lot more exciting to go back off into the wild again,
Yeah.
like we were at the start when we did places like Evendim and
Hmm.
Foreshell and that, and see places that you never would have thought we'd get to see in any adaptation of Tolkien.
Yeah. And I totally understand you being vague. I don't want to get you in trouble by any means. So, um, I am curious. So, I'm sure kind of depends on the realm that you're adapting, but in general, how long does it take you guys to, so like Yondershire is one example of the most recent one, but in general, how long does it take you guys from like, okay, we've decided this is going to be our next location that we're going to do, and then to finally making it, launching it?
Um, it again, it varies a lot. I'd say generally we are if we've been in like the chunk we're doing after Yondershire, we specked out, I'd say, a couple months ago,
Mm.
based on ideas that we had before that. And that'll probably come out in the fourth quarter of this year would be my guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't talk release dates. So, you know, 6 to 9 months. That said, like I had the idea for Yondershire a year ago,
Hmm.
and because we wanted to come up with something for the 15th anniversary, and I was like, well, why don't we go back to the start and actually
Yeah.
link everything up and such. Um, so, but earnest development, it's again, it depends on the size of the area that we're working on. Like Yondershire, we've been in earnest development for, I'd say, 3 months maybe. Whereas the next chunk will have been will have been working in World Builder on it for at least 6,
Okay.
because it's a larger thing than Yondershire is. So there's no typical, but there are a couple different sizes, and it's usually like 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, that's very interesting for sure. So as we're getting close to our time here, we're kind of winding down. I usually do kind of a rapid fire, some questions I like to ask every guest. And the first one is going to be unique to you because this is the first time I've worked this one in. But
You're not
what
going to
is
ask
your
my favorite Elvish swear word, are you?
no? But I kind of want to now that you've brought it up.
Oh no, what did I do?
Um, so I was going to ask, what is your go-to character race in LOTRO?
Um, I would say probably dwarves.
Mm,
I think they're the ones that speak to me the most, and that's, although I wouldn't want to name my character at this point, but yeah.
yeah, you've done enough naming for a lifetime, I have a feeling. um, so what is your favorite Tolkien character?
Favorite Tolkien character. Weirdly, I kind of really dig Eomer,
Yeah,
which I imagine doesn't come up very often, but
that's true.
I like I feel like he's a really solid, like, sort of second string character who
Yeah,
that we just don't get to know enough about in the in the books.
yeah. And especially, I actually talked recently about this on my channel, that especially in the movies, I feel like he really kind of gets the short end of the stick
He's
because
not in Helm's Deep in the movies.
yeah, he's not in Helm's Deep, and he and Aragorn, clearly have a more, kind of brotherly
They're
relationship.
bros. They're total
Yeah,
bros. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I
Their
love that
swords
answer.
together. They're constantly yelling about their swords together.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I do. That's one thing that I love. Explaining people who've not read the books. I'm like, well, if Aragorn has a chance to tell you the name of his sword and why it's important, he will take that opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you were to live in Middle Earth, what realm would you live in?
Um, in the current age, probably I would say probably Rivendell. Elrond's got all the
Mm,
good books.
yeah.
And it's a pretty sweet place to live too, frankly. Even and property values are dropping. But historically, I think a Numinos would be pretty awesome to
Mm,
live in back when Elendil was running the joint.
right. Yes. Definitely pre um Witch King shenanigans.
Yeah, yeah. Before everything started to take a turn.
Right. Yeah. So if there was a place in Middle Earth that you could visit but not live in,
Hmm.
what would that be?
Does it but not live in? Um, I think actually, the whole Erebor Dale Lake Town nexus would be great.
Yeah.
It's just so far away from everything else that I think,
Hmm.
I don't think like, I think it would be a great, if I could fly there, that would be fantastic. Um, and Lake Town, like, you probably get tired of fish after a
Mm,
fairly short while.
right. So that makes it a good vacation
Yeah,
spot.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You want a summer in Lake Town. You don't really want to be
Right.
there in winter, for instance.
Yes. Yeah.
I,
That's a great answer. I love the logic behind that answer. I can tell, this is a man who thinks through all of the questions he's posed with, and that did not disappoint.
already in my head, I'm like, oh, we need to freeze the Long Lake for an instance in the future.
So of all the Tolkien books, which one is your favorite?
I would say the Two Towers is my
Mm,
favorite of definitely of the core four.
okay.
Um, I
What
think
about Beyond the Core 4?
beyond the core
I'm
four,
always
it's
curious of
the
that one.
lands of what I'm not allowed to use. Um, you know, I really enjoyed the Children of Hurin a lot.
Yeah.
It's tonally and thematically really different from everything else that he's
Hmm.
written, pretty much. But that's kind of what's fun about it.
Yeah. That's been my answer too. I am a very big Children of Hurin apologist that I tried to get as many people to read that book. I'm like, it's not uplifting necessarily, but it is phenomenal.
That's your back cover copy right there. That's
Right.
not terribly uplifting.
So this your answer actually made me think of another question related to Lotro and adapting Lotro. So what of Tolkien's material that you guys cannot adapt would you most like to? Like if the Tolkien estate said, "Hey Chris, we're giving you this one pass. You can redeem this ticket to adapt one thing. What are you using that ticket on?"
Um, I mean, can I go anywhere but the War of Wrath on that? I'm not sure. I mean,
Mm,
I think the sacking. Yeah, I mean the sacking of Nargothrond
mm.
and the fall of Ankalagon and all of that. I mean, how could like when we talk about the anime movies,
Yeah.
um, good lord,
Oh my gosh.
maybe one day they'll relax on the rights on that. I kind of
Yeah.
there's part of me that's like part of me that kind of hopes they don't, and part of me that really
Hmm.
hopes they do. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would definitely want to see everything come to a head in the end of the first age.
Yeah. That's a great answer. I think yeah, if that day comes, which I'm in the same boat as you where it's, there the Silmarillion is such a um for those who've read it and you know um really appreciate it in its scope and its importance to everything that comes after. You hold the Silmarillion really dear, and on one hand you think, gosh, I really want to see this adapted, and on the other hand you're like, man, I'm scared to death if this thing gets adapted. So yeah, I there's definitely a duality there.
Absolutely, there is.
Well, that's a fantastic answer. I think the War of Wrath is a great choice. So we'll cross our fingers. Maybe someday, maybe you guys will get to be the first ones that get some Silmarillion rights, and yeah, that'll certainly be monstrous news if it ever happens when the Silmarillion rights are divvied out.
I look forward to hosing everyone's frame rate.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you wanted to say to viewers, or anything else you that we didn't cover that you wanted to bring up?
I'm. I mean, not really. We covered a lot of ground
We
here.
did, yeah.
I think there's I just want everyone to know that we have a lot of ideas still, and we have a hopefully a lot of opportunity to see those through in the over the next several years at least. Um, I mean, I never would have guessed that when I started this thing that I'd still be doing it 20 years later. Will I still be doing it 20 years after that? Well, if I'm mobile, maybe. But yeah, I think it'll be there's definitely room to do it for another 20 years, and that's really exciting.
Well, we're gonna hold you to it. So I'm gonna put in my calendar that 20 years from now we're gonna do another interview here. Hopefully, we can do some more in the interim, obviously. But 20 years from now, we'll be celebrating the 35th, anniversary of LOTRO and talking about, the War of Wrath adaptation that's just then
Yes,
coming
yes.
out. Well, Chris, thank you so much again for joining us. Again, everyone, if you haven't, chances are most of you already have, but if you haven't, definitely go sign on to LOTRO, try it out. You will be very, very glad that you did. It's a wonderful community. It's a wonderful game. I will definitely be there. I will actually be hopping over there. Give me some transition time here, but I am actually going to start over on the Twitch channel. The Nerd of the Rings over on Twitch. I'm going to go ahead and do a late night LOTRO stream and kind of level up my character, get to double digits. So join me over there. I hope you guys will join me. Chris, again, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
All right, everyone. Well, we'll see you around in LOTRO, and we'll also see you next time here on Nerd of the Rings.